Text set 5, author study, and illustrator study, Patricia Polacco. Our goal for today is to include the problem solution and summarizing the text. Okay. Today I'm going to read a book called The Bee Tree. Who wrote this book? Patricia Polacco's name is on the cover, but would anything else signal to you that she wrote it? How does this cover remind you of the other Patricia Polacco books you've heard? Thinking about those other books, whom do you think is on the cover? Today's book is about a race to find a bee tree. A bee tree is a tree where bees make honey. That honey is delicious. How do you think they will find a bee tree? Let's read to find out. I'm tired of reading, Grandpa, Mary Ellen sighed. I'd rather be outdoors running and playing. So you don't feel like reading, eh? Feeling like running, do you? Then I expect this is just the right time to find a bee tree, he said, taking down a jar and putting on his lucky hat. What's a bee tree, Grandpa? Mary Ellen asked. Well, it's where the bees make their home. It's where they keep the honey, the sweetness in the land, Grandpa chirped excitedly. But we already have honey, Grandpa, Mary Ellen said. Ah, but not honey like this, her grandpa answered with a wink. Mary Ellen and her grandpa put on their coats and went outdoors. They walked down past the hollyhocks to the garden and found bees gathering pollen from the flowers. Her grandpa carefully trapped some in the glass jar, making sure not to hurt them. When he was sure that they had enough, he smiled and leaned close to Mary Ellen. They'll take the pollen back to the hive to make it into honey, and we'll be right behind them. Then he slowly loosened the lid of the jar and let one single bee escape. It stayed out on the mouth of the jar for a moment, flew straight up, then buzzed toward the cornfield. Quick, now, run, Grandpa called out as he began to chase the bee. This book tells you the main character's problem right away. What is it? What does Grandpa suggest to solve Mary Ellen's problem? Just then Mrs. Govlock from down the creek way was walking baby Sylvester in his carriage. Mary Ellen and her grandpa ran by them. We're off to find a bee tree today, Grandpa shouted. I haven't done that since I was a girl, Mrs. Govlock said excitedly. May I come too? Grandpa motioned her to follow, and the three of them were off and running. Baby Sylvester laughed out loud as his carriage bumped and bounced through the rows of corn. Honk, went a goose as it waddled after them. So Grandpa lets one single bee out of the jar. Why do you think he only lets one out? As they came from the cornfield across Dietz Junction, Honore Tunvold came around the bend on his squeaky old bike. Where are you all going in such a hurry? He said. A bee tree, Mary Ellen puffed as the foursome scurried by, chasing a bee to its tree. This I would like to do so also, he said as he stood up and pedaled faster. The wheels of his bike went twiddle, twiddle, squeak. Their boots slapped the ground. The buggy pitched and swayed, and the goose honked as they ran after that bee. The bee swooped down, stopped, held in midair, then circled past them and headed straight for the St. Joe River. Ulf Lundingen, while strolling on the nearby shore with the charming Herman sisters, Petra and Dorma, looked up and noticed the commotion coming toward them. Where are y'all going? He called out. To a bee tree. Where are you going? Eleanor Tundervold puffed as he paddled by. Can we come too? The two lovely ladies pleaded. Fast, you'll have to run, Eleanor said. We don't care, let's go. The three shouted as they raced after him. Slap, bump, honk, twiddle, twiddle, squeak, blump. They all went as they sped down the road after that bee. Klondike, Bertha Fitchwork, just back from an expedition in the Yukon, had car trouble next to the road. She looked up just in time to see everybody running by. You say you're after a bee tree? She shrieked. Zounds, that won't be easy, but Eureka, what an adventure. She sprinted along behind them. The bee dipped and soared as it made its way out of sight. what are some of the names we've heard so far? I've never heard names like these before. That's kind of funny to say out loud. The noise the bike makes is really interesting. Tweedle, tweedle, squeak. Let's say it together. But Grandpa carefully let another out, and the chase was on again. The noisy, merry bunch galloped over the bird-talk-fellow ridge, only to run smack dab into Fabrica Long Drop's herd of goats. The goats pleaded and bucked as the people clamped through them. "What ho!" Ferruccio called out. "You're gonna scare my goats, me goats!" "A bee tree," a voice called back, with the Ferruccio taut as his flute, and his flock joined the chase. "Bounding billies, this will be great," he said on a dead run. 3 traveling musicians looked up just in time to see a thundering stampede of goats, buggies, people, and bikes coming straight for them. "Why are they all running, Pa?" one of the boys asked his father. "We're after the bee," Grandpa said, pointing to the small dot in the sky. "It's leading us to the bee tree," Mary Ellen wailed as she streaked by them. "Come on along, Klondike," Bertha chortled as she huffed past. All right, take a good look at the illustrations. What do you think the story when do you think the story takes place? Is it set in the past, the present, or the future? How can you tell? The time and place or the setting of the story. You should know that. Slap, bump, bleak, bonk, honk, tweedle, tweedle, squeak, thump. They went as they ran. Hoofs clattered, rows of corn were parted. Nothing really mattered but chasing that bee. They ran through Greener's Bluff and into Bishop's Meadow, around Dead Man's Tree, and then to Bird Talk Hollow. As they ran down the hollow, the bee took blinding speed and disappeared from their sight. They all stopped to catch their breath just in front of Dunk's woods. Grandpa handed the jar with the last bee in it to Mary Ellen, and she let it go. Sure enough, it flew straight and low right into Dunk's woods. "It's the bee tree," Grandpa whispered. "That's where the honey will be, but we'll need plenty of smoke." So now you know why Grandpa needed more than one bee in his jar. Slap, bump, bleep, honk, tweedle, tweedle, squeak, bump. What is that? The group chasing the bee to the bee tree is getting longer and longer and noisier and noisier. Now that they know where the bee tree is, why do you think they need smoke? So everyone set about to build a smoke fire from twigs and damp leaves. When the smoke had quieted the bees, Grandpa balanced on Eleanor's bicycle and reached into the trees. As he pulled out small pieces of honeycomb, he dropped them into some of baby Sylvester's spare clean diapers that Klondike, Bertha, was holding. Mary Ellen tied them into neat little bundles, and Mr. Lonhagen put them into the baby carriage. The musicians played merrily as the Hermannien sisters danced. Grandpa invited everyone back to the house for baking powder, biscuits, fresh brewed tea, and of course the honey. There was music, dancing, tall tales, and raucous laughter as they all buzzed about the sweet adventure of the day. Grandpa took Mary Ellen into the inside, away from the crowd. "Now, child, I am going to show you what my father showed me and his father before him," he said quietly. He spooned the honey onto the cover of one of her books. "Taste," he said, almost in a whisper. Mary Ellen savored the honey on her book. "There is such sweetness inside of that book, too," he said thoughtfully. "Such things, adventure, knowledge, and wisdom. But these things do not come easily. You have to pursue them, just like we ran after the bees to find the tree. So you must also chase these things through the pages of a book." Then he smiled and hugged her. So what does this illustration tell about how Mary Ellen and Grandpa feel about each other? From that day on, Mary Ellen never again complained about her reading. She found it to be every bit as exciting as a wild chase through the Michigan countryside and as sweet as the honey from a bee tree.